Welcome to today's webinar, Lessons from the Field, How Leading Companies Deliver Leadership Development at Scale, presented by Jeff Howard and Mike Smith of the Center for Creative Leadership. I'm Michelle Bryan, your CCL event host. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top-ranked global provider of leadership development. By leveraging the power of leadership to drive results that matter most to clients, CCL transforms individual leaders, teams, and organizations and societies. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will have a formal Q&A session with our presenters. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please send them into the chat box to all participants. And for those joining the live session today, check out our Twitter feed right now at twitter.com/ccldot.org. We are conducting live polls on this topic. If you participate in a poll, like the tweet and follow us, and you'll be automatically entered to win a free CCL gift. I'd now like to introduce our presenters. Jeff Howard is Vice President and Managing Director, Global Licensing and Leadership Products at CCL. Has been with the Center since 1996. CCL's Global Learning Products team makes CCL's research, experience, and expertise accessible at scale through licensing, digital learning, workshops, assessments, tool sets, and publications to create sustainable results for our clients. And Mike Smith is the Director and Business Development Lead in the Organizational Leadership Practice at CCL. After starting his career in higher education on the faculty at the Bryan School of Business, Mike went on to become a business leader in private industry. He was co-founder of an entrepreneurial startup and led functions in a Fortune 100 company that included marketing, strategic alliances, new business development, legislative, regulatory affairs, and strategic planning. Mike was also one of the principal architects of a leadership initiative that was the catalyst for profound cultural transformation in his company that ultimately improved enterprise-wide collaboration, innovation, engagement, and business performance. So happy you guys are both here with us today, Jeff and Mike, and I'll turn it over to you guys.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure being with everyone today, so we really appreciate your time. Today, we're going to talk about leadership development at scale. So this first slide is really about sometimes the task of developing leadership in large organizations can feel totally overwhelming. There are people everywhere. Each person's contributing to goals, leading critical customer-facing processes. They're leading major functions. They're the entrepreneurs internally that are going to bring your next big product to market. But as we know, that there's a tight labor market, and these people have options. So when we're trying to develop leadership development, introduce these concepts, or further their journey in leadership development, it can seem a bit overwhelming. There are many approaches to leadership and how we can do scale. Today in the webinar, we'll be talking about some of those. But before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone in the live session to jump over to the chat and send a chat to all participants about the following question. When you think about the need to bring leadership development to large populations and organizations, the concept that brought you to this webinar today, when you think about that, what are you trying to achieve? What are the biggest outcomes you're looking for? And I'll give you a moment to jump into the chat and give some ideas. This will also introduce you a bit to one another and give us a feel of who's in the audience. Jump over in the chat. There you go. Yep, succession, excellent. Others? Great, culture stuff. Yeah. And if you're not looking at your chat on the webinar, you might want to look because these are starting to populate in. Improved organizational results, performance clearly. Great. Thank you for participating in that. Just want to get a feel for who we're working with today. So I'm going to jump on to the next slide. We're seeing many of these same issues, right? Attracting and retaining employees, transforming culture, talking about leadership pipeline and figuring out frontline leaders and how to introduce leadership concepts to the frontline earlier in their career. And we've all wished we had been introduced to some of these concepts earlier in our careers. There's two that I'm going to pull out today, and we're going to talk in a moment about some stories of organizations that many of you have heard of but organizations that have struggled with this. And there's two kind of major things we tend to see. It's either on that cultural transformation side, something that they want to install a new capability across the organization at all levels, and so they have to think about the scale of doing that. Or it's about that frontline pipeline kind of question, which is we've got a lot of people in our organization at the lower levels of organization, and we have to figure out how to introduce these concepts to them. And those are the two stories we're going to talk about today. So what I'm going to do is jump over to the next slide, and we'll introduce case studies that we'll walk through on Walmart, of course, the world's largest retailer, and then Banco Popular, which is a financial services company that is based in Puerto Rico, has U.S. operations, Caribbean, Central American operations. And we'll talk about the challenges that these organizations faced and how we address them before we jump into some principles and techniques that we use to help with our clients. So for the story on Walmart and what we did there, I'll turn it over to Mike Smith, who can walk you through that. Mike?
Thanks, Jeff. As I'm sure everybody here is aware, Walmart operates at massive scale. I want to start with a little bit of background that connects this story to the topic of the day, leadership at scale, and then we'll sort of move into the challenges, the approach, and the results of the work. So as Jeff said, Walmart is the largest retailer in the world. Amazon is number 4 for reference. Walmart's the Fortune #1 company in the United States. And when we began working with them 4 to 5 years ago, they were operating with well over 6,000 brick-and-mortar stores in 28 countries with 2.2 million associates or employees worldwide. So they are operating at massive scale without question. Retail was and still is a very hyper-competitive marketplace. The company was dealing with rapidly shifting consumer buying preferences and the introduction of new technologies that were disrupting every aspect of their value chain. So with all of these external market dynamics at play and the scale of their operation, Walmart was also busy internally addressing their business strategy. More specifically, their CEO was spearheading a new vision to reinvent the company with a focus on 5 key areas, and one of those was developing and unleashing the company's talent, so putting intentional focus on their people and how they can best serve Walmart's customers and support the business. So what more specifically was our leadership challenge? So the challenge that our companies faced working together was to develop a globally consistent leadership system, or you could think of it as a curriculum, that would span multiple leader levels and also flex to accommodate unique local conditions and cultural norms around the globe. And again, all of this was in service of executing the CEO's vision. In the early going of this work, Walmart identified 4 key themes for this system of leadership, and they're there on your slide. Thinking and problem solving, developing talent, which was really about developing leaders who in turn would become adept at coaching and developing the talent of others, adaptability and change, and execution. And the initial goal that we were trying to tackle was scaling this initiative to a population of 35,000 to 45,000 key leaders as quickly as possible within the first 24 months, and then continuing to develop leaders after that milestone was achieved. So that was the challenge. How did we approach the challenge? So we designed this leadership system to span 4 distinct leader levels: leading others, leading leaders, leading a function, and leading the organization. The system was designed or constructed so that every leader level could hold other levels accountable for shared leadership behaviors and practices. And as I said just a moment ago, Walmart wanted to build a globally consistent leadership program. What that meant was they wanted a system of leadership that would provide common language, common frameworks, and common leadership practices across their organization. The connective tissue in the system that sort of enabled this accountability across levels and geographies around the world was the use of the 4 themes: the thinking and problem solving, developing talent, adaptability, and change and execution. Those 4 themes were used in every program with every leader level. However, as you might suspect, the content and the developmental experiences were adjusted for relevancy. So, for example, as I'm sure everybody on this webinar is aware, adaptability and change shows up very differently for frontline leaders than it does for someone who is leading a function or leading the whole enterprise. So that was a very intentional part of the work. The business model was very straightforward. We designed the solution together to ensure it was tightly aligned with Walmart's strategy. We licensed the curriculum and all of the content and IP within it to Walmart, and then included a robust train-the-trainer, actually a master trainer program that enabled Walmart to leverage their internal staff to engage and develop their leaders worldwide. So they had the internal capacity to take this on themselves. The train-the-trainer work was helping them develop the capability to leverage the content frameworks and tools that CCL brought to the party. So what were the results? What was the impact of this work together? Walmart looked at impact in 2 general categories, and the first is strategic execution. From a business perspective, this is why they were investing in this initiative in the first place. So what I can tell you about this is, as you might suspect, Walmart uses a myriad of operational KPIs to run their business, and many of those are connected to leadership initiatives. We're not at liberty to share specific KPI results with you, but suffice it to say, for Walmart, what they tracked met or exceeded their expectations. I'd also just sort of offer as another point of evidence from stakeholders outside of Walmart that the nice lift in their stock price they've enjoyed over the same period of time is at least a reflection of, again, external perspectives on how effectively they can execute a strategy. Another point to make here is Walmart's prominence in the retail sector. So they remain an industry leader. They are still the Fortune #1 company in the U.S., and they are now for 6 years in a row. And if you think about how much the retail market has changed in the past 6 years, it's a testament to their leadership and their ability to execute. Elevating the customer experience was also a big deal in the CEO's plan of reinvention, and Walmart was intentional about trying to document ways their associates were innovating in service of their customers, and they've been pretty pleased with those results. The other area of impact evaluation is more traditional. Walmart ran program evaluations that looked at common categories like overall satisfaction, applicability of the experience on the job, skill assessment scores, and all of these have met or exceeded expectations over time. We also have a quote here on the slide that was provided by a senior vice president out in the field at Walmart, and I'll let you read it, but suffice it to say it was at least some qualitative affirmation of the power of the experience that Walmart's associates were receiving and its relevancy to running the business in the context of so much change. And we were sort of pleased that we were almost inundated with these sorts of bits of qualitative feedback over the last several years. So just to wrap up the Walmart story, Walmart is still a CCL partner today. They are still delivering this global leadership program to their associates around the world, and CCL is certainly privileged to have the opportunity to continue to work with them. Back to you, Seth.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So we'll jump right into another case study that illustrates some of the challenges that organizations deal with and different scales and different issues. So whereas Walmart was focused on driving those skills further down in their organization and creating examples of opportunities to build pipeline to talk about how leadership matters and get that common language of leadership at these different leader levels with some continuity. Popular had a little bit different challenge, so they're more on the culture side. They were really trying to work on very explicitly targeting the culture of Popular. So starting with the challenge, they looked at their markets, their labor markets, and said, look, we have to attract and retain talent. They had been doing internal engagement surveys, and those surveys said that some of the challenge areas for them was around collaborative, trusting culture, that we want to be able to talk to one another and not be conflict averse and be able to have conversations that drive performance and business results. And that was a big piece for them. They weren't sure originally how to get at that and what the level of effort it would take to really change the culture. And then, like Walmart, of course, not at the same scale as our partners at Walmart, they wanted all 8,000 employees to be engaged in this initiative. Once the CEO got involved and realized that they could make tremendous progress and movement in their culture by engaging everyone, that they really took lead and started driving the initiative in the organization. So that was the challenge that we helped them uncover, some of the initial challenges and then some of the solutions that we helped them uncover. So let's jump over to the approach that we took. In the approach, really, number one was aligning their business strategy to their new behavior. So how do we think about what Popular is trying to accomplish and how these strategic initiatives that they're focused on are connected to that? That's something that we at CCL want to do with every client, make sure we do with every client. Because if it's not driving the performance of the business, it's not helpful to them. So at every level and every initiative, we want to drive to that. What we offered to them was a program that we have that is called Better Conversations Every Day. It's available on our website. You can look it up. But it really creates a simple model for how to have better conversations between all employees in a way that provides you a model for that, an approach to it, and the practice that helps you get there. And so they really liked that, and we did some things with them to make it their own, and we worked with them on the overall process, as we'll talk about in a moment. But that program really was the heart of what we did. And it's something that we can deliver. It's something that we can do train the trainer, and we have all those models in play with them. The other beauty of this is because it's about conversations, everyone has conversations. So it is the C-suite all the way to the lowest level employee in the organization can have better conversations when they're dealing with other people in the organization. So the approach we had to take, though, to get at all 8,000 people with this type of content and this construct was related to CCL delivery. So the top 350 people in the organization went through a version of that program, which we call the signature version. It is facilitated. It has table coaching where the individual table coaches are working through the different elements of our approach to better conversations and helping tailor that in the moment, contextualize it to the audiences at hand. So CCL delivery for the top 350. The next step was Popular started doing train the trainers. So we had to bring up to speed more trainers across their enterprise, and Popular, and they're in the very tail end of delivering the next 1,400. And they're using something called the facilitator model. It's a little simpler. They've simplified the design for scale, and they're using the essentials model, which is no table coaches or they're using actually a blended approach. So there's facilitators in the front room and people who are roaming around. But they're using a slightly simplified approach for that. But the next 1,400 down are receiving the same ideas, the same framework for how conversations happen, and the same level of practice that we're providing. And then for the rest of the organization, we are in development right now with them on a series of micro-learning assets that actually everyone in the organization will receive. So the micro-learning assets are going to go to the only thing that the lowest levels of the organization receive, but the people who went through the Popular delivery as well as CCL delivery will also receive them. That operates in a couple of different ways. It provides ongoing support. It provides a common language of leadership and this better conversations top to bottom in the organization. It provides reminders as well that they can go back to. And for the people who are lower level in the organization, that micro-learning, which is headlined by the CEO, discussing the importance of this and the investment and the time and energy that they're making, becomes part of their learning journey as well. So that's the approach that we were able to take to reach those 8,000 people with this very targeted and narrow focused behavior and culture change. If we jump over to the results, there are a couple of things that happen. So one, we were targeting specifically this trusting and collaborative culture piece. That was our main focus area. And that is one of their strategic pillars. From all accounts, from everything that we're seeing, we have the program evaluations, which I won't go through, but through a rigorous train-the-trainer process, and support for those trainers, which is really important because they go out and spread out in the field and they're trying to deliver this content that they've been introduced to and trained. So we need to make sure not only that the training for the trainers is solid, but that they have the support they need as well. But these are the blended results that both CCL delivery as well as the Popular delivery are achieving in terms of program evaluations. So on a 5-point scale, 4.7 for satisfaction, almost 4.7 for applicable to work, and 4.67 for likely to recommend this to other people in the organization. So that's getting at the program evaluations, but at a higher level, that trust and collaboration piece is something that Popular is doubling down on, and they believe in it. They believe it is moving the needle for them, and they are doubling down and extending this even further down into the organization. That's something that we're discussing with them right now. But there was a secondary benefit that was a bit unexpected for us. They have another strategic pillar, and that other strategic pillar, and there's several, but that other strategic pillar is enhancing customer service. And one of the things that they're reporting back to us is that because we are training all of their people in having better conversations and what that looks like and the model of how to do that, that's also enhancing their customer service. So it's actually hit not only the main objective, but a bit of an unintended consequence was the enhancing customer service, which is another strategic objective for them. So those are the results that we're getting, and because of what they're seeing and the shift they're seeing in their organization at scale, they are now doubling down and continuing, moving full speed ahead with all the micro-learning, and now extending some of the populations that we originally targeted through delivery as well. So that is the Popular story. And before we move on, I want to ask another question to the group. So if you don't mind going back to your chat, jumping into the all participants so that we can see your responses as they come across, I'll ask you this question. What major challenges have you experienced? If you've done this before, what major challenges have you experienced or do you anticipate experiencing if you need to go to scale? Now, in these cases, we went to 35 to 45,000, and we were helping with 8,000. But when we go to larger scale, could be hundreds in your case, could be thousands. What challenges do you anticipate experiencing? We want to be able to just see those so we can understand how to tailor our next part, which is about 3 principles that we apply when we go into these situations with clients. Okay, so we've got cost. Yep, quality of trainers, absolutely. Yep, measuring ROI. Access, greatest challenge. Sole initiator of the leadership development. Yep, that's a big one. Geographic dispersion, we see that. Obviously budgets. These are large initiatives, no doubt. Language translations, we can touch on that as well.
Yeah, these are all good, all very real.
Yeah, full alignment, absolutely. Yeah, sustaining buy-in, absolutely. Because these initiatives, as you heard from Walmart, the first 2 years was gigantic, but they've been doing this for 5 years. They've been staying on it, staying on it.
Still at it.
That's right. And we're going to be, working with Popular over several years on this same initiative as well. Okay. Excellent. Thanks. Well, thanks for that context. That really does help us tailor to what your needs are, what you're seeing, what you're trying to accomplish. So let's jump in then. There are 3 principles that when we start an engagement with a client and they're starting to talk about this, there are 3 principles that we begin with. And for the first one, I'll turn it over to Mike to get us kicked off.
Thanks, Jeff. And we will try to weave in connections to what you've shared in the chat. And again, really appreciate you doing that. To the extent that we don't get to anything, we are going to have some time for questions later. So be thinking about what you'd want to ask us that we might not have covered. So principle 1, strategy first. Focus on strategy. So I just want to quickly cover off these 4 bullet points. The first one here is to step back and really think about the big picture, and ask yourself these questions. What are the specific challenges and opportunities that your organization faces, and what business strategy or strategic imperatives are in place today or need to be put in place to address the challenges and also enable you to capitalize on the opportunities. As basic as those questions are, they are absolutely fundamental in informing both your business strategy and your leadership strategy, how you want to leverage leadership to achieve your goals. So I want you to jump to the 3rd bullet on the slide, and I want to make a few points here, because when you've posed those 2 questions to yourself about challenges and opportunities, you use that to inform your business strategy, think about viewing leadership as another strategic lever. Once the business strategy is clear, the next step is to tease out or identify the individual leadership skills and the collective or organizational leadership capabilities that are needed to execute that strategy. So you're of course probing introspectively, what are the current strengths that already are present in the organization, what gaps exist. Once the gaps are identified, what's the most effective way to address those gaps in terms of learning impact as well as cost. Companies, the point we want to make here about leadership being viewed as a strategic lever, it's really a mindset. Companies would never go to market without a product strategy or a marketing strategy, a sales strategy, or an operations strategy, and we could go on, right? They should never go to market without a leadership strategy and one that's explicitly aligned to the business strategy. So if I can jump you back to the 2nd bullet on the slide, this is a bit of a blind statement of the obvious here. The next element of this principle is to make sure that there's a shared understanding of both the business and leadership strategies across the organization at all levels. In some ways, a fundamental communications challenge or goal. You want people to understand the behaviors and ways of working that are expected of them, and you want them to see how their work supports the strategy and the achievement of the organization's goals. And then lastly in this principle, be sure you take the time to assess the organization's readiness It's easy for many of us working in this field to try to move quickly and take swift action, but it's critically important to make sure you're testing readiness. So have the conversations with key stakeholders to ensure that they understand what's really required to support a leadership initiative at scale and are fully bought into it. And that's Principle 1. Jeff, I'll turn it back to you for Principle 2.
Okay, great, thanks. So Principle 2, once the strategy is aligned and you know what you're doing and what's important and what's connected to performance in business, then you've got to figure out how. How are you going to design this initiative? And this is really what Principle 2 is about, how we build it. So the first rule of thumb is don't overwhelm your colleagues with stuff. So you've been trying to get this training. A lot of people tell us, we've been trying to get training for years. We've got an opportunity now. Senior leadership is now aligned and we've got something to say. So we're going to train them on everything we've been meaning to train them on for the last several years. And we can throw everything in, including the kitchen sink. So what we find is to not overwhelm your colleagues with stuff because we have an opportunity. And this is a challenge because there's so many things we want to do. We want to make sure it's the right content at the right time for the right reason. We want to make sure it's certainly connected, as Mike mentioned a moment ago. We want to make sure it's focused on the skills, behaviors, and practice needed by leaders at the organization according to their business strategy and what we want them to focus on. So if you noticed in Walmart, they picked 4 things. All 4 leader levels were focused on those same 4 things. And we created differences at level about how they could comprehend or what it meant to them at level, that relevancy. But they created those 4 things and they drove those 4 things. In the Banco Popular example, it was really about this culture of coaching and conversation. We picked one thing with 4 skills in it, and we started driving it. So don't overwhelm your colleagues with stuff, I think is kind of principle number 1, because we now have an opportunity. Number 2, leaders learn in different ways. So it's critical to design a mix and a modes of learning that work for the leaders at this level and skill level that they are. That was mentioned in one of the chat pieces as well. This one's also tied to an investment levels that we have at different leader levels. Obviously, what we're doing for very senior levels and what we're doing for very junior levels have different levels of investment per person. So we're focused on also providing what works within an investment level, what works for that leader, and what level we want them to be exposed to, and what level of mastery we want them to have. Obviously, at the very senior levels, we're having a higher level of transformation and mastery, generally speaking, with higher levels of investment. When you get to lower levels, you want to make sure they're aligned, knowledgeable, and aware, and able to understand what's happening in the organization. So we want to connect those 2 things. So leaders learn in different ways, and we have this level of investment, which is highly correlated with that. Obviously, there's a reliance on technology. We need to make sure that either you have the technology, many people have invested in LMSs or created these learning record stores or done a lot of things, but make sure that the partner that you're working with, be it CCL or someone else, has the technology to bring to bear if it's not something you have in-house, or that they have the ability to work within the technology you're working with and invested so much in. But when you get to scale, particularly at the very lowest levels of organization, technology is a critical success factor. And if you don't have that in place, then make sure you're connected with someone who does. And then finally, we talk about mechanisms for accountability. I'll add, based on the chat, support over learning over time here. But accountability, there's a couple of things that we see. Number 1, and we've hit it a couple of times, senior engagement. When senior leaders are engaged and they're putting out messages and they are involved and in the courses or shooting videos, that creates an accountability because you know it's important to the C-suite. Boss support. Everything we do at CCL shows us that boss support for learning drives accountability. And so having everyone working on something, or at least figuring out a very clear way to engage those bosses is critically important in the accountability. And then the other thing, piece that we use, or process that we use, are accountability partners. So within the learning, pair people up. Give them the opportunity to talk to each other and to make public statements of their intention to change their behavior to one another, and get them in the moment while you have them. Set those meetings 3 weeks, 2 months, 6 months out. Go ahead and put them on the calendars so that when they get there, at least it's a touchstone and a reminder for them that, oh, I committed to making this behavioral change that was important to the organization. That gives us a way to really drive accountability. So, you know, that's those are the principles in number 2, is really about how do you build it and how do you kind of put it together. Let's give a quick illustration, though, of some of the typical kinds of designs of how that actually looks. So as we've said a couple of times, that senior team alignment, there's something for everyone at every level if we're doing it top to bottom. If we're focused on those hypos and the lower regions, there's still the senior engagement that we want to make sure is there, and the senior teams are understanding what those new employees and younger employees are learning. But that engagement with the senior team, critically important. At the next level down, generally speaking, the more senior leaders in organizations, they're receiving development which is at a much different level of complexity and different types of modes and modalities. This little bar with the colors is really just to illustrate a potential type of design as an illustration of a design that might be going on at those senior levels. And as we go to the next level down, what we're seeing organizations do effectively is pulling out some of the key elements from what the senior leaders are going through in a much more complex and focused way, pulling some of those key elements out, figuring out what's most important to cascade down, and then creating ability to build skills in those key areas below that level to that next level. Oftentimes, as in the Popular example, this is where we then license these things into you, or your partner licenses these things into you, and then you're delivering these to support and connect to what the senior teams are getting. And then when we go down, if you recall, we were talking about micro-learning, we were talking about technology distribution, we were talking about many different things. But as you get really down in the organization at these front lines, making certain that these key concepts, now they're shorter, they're probably quicker, we want awareness of what's important in our organization to go to those levels, and so there's those same concepts taken down to the next level. So on the arrows on the left, really about creating common language of leadership. Senior teams align, executive sponsors and senior people are receiving deep development. Next level down, receiving development, often face-to-face, sometimes digital. And then the very lowest organizations are receiving either smaller bite-size, or digital. So that's how organizations that we work with, not just the two we've talked about, are actually implementing this scaling up and down the organization, and there's key support and success factors for each one of these levels that we can get into in some of the questions. So with that, that's really about how we build it, how we think about it, how we architect these kinds of scale leadership development areas. And I'll turn it back over to Mike to talk us through the final step, the final principle that we apply as we go into these engagements. So why don't you take it, Mike?
All right. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for hanging in there, everybody on the webinar. So I do want to take just a few minutes to talk about Principle 3, which is focused on leveraging the right talent both inside and outside, your organization. So once you have a well-defined strategy in place to address leadership at scale, there are a few important pragmatic or implementation-oriented questions to ask yourself. One of those is, do you have the internal talent you need to execute your leadership initiative on your own? Walmart was an example where that was the case. There are many examples of organizations that aren't really, that don't really have the right talent inside to execute. A sort of second related question is, even if you have the right talent internally, do you also have the internal capacity and the right content and the right learning approaches to develop the leadership behaviors and practices that your organization needs? So if there are sort of gaps or open, unanswered areas in any of these questions, look for a third party to help you address them. And I'd like to sort of share a few practical considerations, however self-evident they may seem as I rattle them off. When you're looking for a third party, find someone that will work with you as a true partner, that will sort of operate as a seamless extension of your organization. Make sure there's a cultural fit between the third party and your organization, and alignment of values and developmental philosophy. We have tried to be at CCL very intentional in conversations with clients about these ways of working together to ensure that everyone is aligned and we can really execute in a world-class fashion together as things get underway. Look for that partner that will help you build the internal capability and capacity that you may want or need over the long run. You want to make sure you have a partner who's going to make an investment in you and your organization and the initiative, and will stick with you and support you over time. Jeff spoke to the importance of ongoing support in the Popular study earlier in this webinar. The last thing you want is a partner that might design a great solution. They might deliver a train-the-trainer program, then throw all that over the fence to you and then virtually disappear. For these types of initiatives, which are journeys over time, make sure you've got that ongoing support that you want and need. And then lastly, make sure that the partner has the ability to deliver the right content and to appropriately contextualize it for your organization, your industry, and will keep it fresh, relevant, and compelling over time. Another kind of key point in this principle is the integration of your business leaders. CCL is a huge proponent of leader-led development. We know that real sustainable organizational change has to embrace everyone, as Jeff said earlier, and that real change requires embedding new behaviors into everyday work. To that end, integrating your business line leaders, your functional leaders, will help you achieve those goals. They'll be able to more easily identify or work in partnership with you to find places needed in the business to begin applying new leadership behaviors, outside of the context of formal training. They will serve as catalysts for change and champion your cause, and hopefully help you secure the resources and the commitment that you need to achieve your goals. And then lastly, keep your business leaders and your internal staff regularly connected so that they can share best practices with each other, support each other, and continue the learning process, improving the developmental experience of the leaders with whom they're working. One really effective way to do this is to create a community of practice. And if you have a third party involved, make sure that that's part of that third party's obligation to you and the initiative, to be part of that community of practice. That's principle 3. And from here, I'd just like to close off the webinar and move to questions. What I'd like to do, though, before we go to questions is first thank you all for your time today. We hope this was time well spent. In summary, we talked about 2 major client experiences with Leadership at Scale and the impact of those efforts and some of the tactics involved. We also talked about 3 foundational principles that are also in a white paper you can find at CCL's website. These principles, we would encourage you to keep them in mind when you're embarking on any leadership initiative at scale. They are focus on strategy first, the right learning for the right level, and leveraging the right talent inside and outside your organization. So leadership, at scale is really a means to an end. it's ultimately about achieving your organization's goals and growing and thriving today and in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to our moderator for questions.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you have questions for Jeff or Mike, send them to all participants or all panelists in the chat feature. We'll go ahead and get to the ones that have come through so far. One question about Walmart. What was the duration of the programs and how were they delivered in a retail environment?
So this is Mike. I'll be happy to take that. The Walmart programs were designed as 4-day face-to-face experiences, but they were also modularized so that each of the 4 days was designed around 8 half-day segments. What this allowed Walmart to do was be flexible in how they engaged people in functions at corporate or leaders in the stores around the world. And what we saw was they were out delivering, in some cases, 4-day intact face-to-face experiences, and in some cases, half-day segments, or 2 days and then 2 following days. So there were sort of a multiplicity of ways they could deliver the full scope of the content to make sure they were meeting the needs of their internal customers. And kind of related to this, and I want to connect it back to some of the good comments that people shared in the chat. There was a question about geographic dispersion and face-to-face delivery. So while Walmart was able to do a lot of face-to-face delivery, they did design and deliver a virtual version of some of those half-day segments. So that was one strategy they used to tackle that issue. There was another question about sustaining learning in a scale initiative like this after the formal development concludes. So what we did with Walmart were a few things. One, we developed in stretch experiences, which were basically workplace applications. We like to refer to them at CCL as heat experiences. So these became opportunities that required a leader and his or her direct manager to identify experiences that the business requires of them that would obviously help advance the business needs, but also be an intentional learning or developmental experience for the individual. And that was a big part of the Walmart approach to sustaining learning after the formal training was completed. Over time, we didn't really start out here, but over time we also began to build more snackable content or micro-learning as a resource for leaders later. And that was also something that Jeff touched on earlier.
Yeah, one of the questions that came in was for Popular, the micro-learning assets, examples for all employees. So we are, as I mentioned in the case, we are actually in the midst of building that, but also I can speak generally about an approach to micro-learning. We take these concepts, you remember the pyramid, and when we get down to the lower levels, we'll take these concepts and we'll create these micro-learning experiences for people. So generally they're pretty short, 15 to 20-minute kinds of pieces that we deliver generally through technology, that we've done it other ways, where we'll deliver that. And linking back to what Mike said about leader-led and engaging your business leaders, it's best when those are done in team meetings, at functional meetings, where the leader of that function is saying, hey, so there's an initiative going on, there are certain things that we know are linked to our business, and here's our chance to dive in. Let's watch this, engage with this for a few minutes, or they'll send it out as pre-work in advance, and then they'll create time in team meetings to allow people to discuss that, how that applies to the work of the particular function they're working on, and then at the next team meeting, they'll do a debrief. So that's a fairly typical way. It's not rocket science, but it's a fairly typical way that we will engage in micro-learning. We love that when it's leader-led, because when it's facilitator-led or HR-led, sometimes like, well, that's something we have to go to do. When it's embedded in our team meetings, it makes it more real, and we can make it applicable. And so as those business leaders or line leaders can take that on, that's even better. So we do that in multiple ways, and that's what we're building with the micro-learning within Banco Popular right now, but we don't have the example to pull up on screen and show you right away. Other questions here. There was one about e-learning services. We haven't been asked to go to LinkedIn Learning or something and look, but we could. If there's certain aspects you have access to, what we're finding, the clients that are coming to us are generally saying, we like your perspective, your point of view on leadership, and they know we have assets, both digital assets as well as face-to-face assets in various bite-sized pieces or smaller sessions, half day, up to full day, 2-day. And so generally we're working within our IP, but I don't think it's an unreasonable question to ask someone to say, hey, I've already subscribed to a LinkedIn Learning or some of the other competitors that are out there, and these are the things they have, and we want to show these as a way to put this in the initiative. That's some of the planning that a good partner should do with you when you're leveraging the investments you've already made. A lot of times in the digital space, what we're getting is you have digital assets, but they're on your platform, but I have a platform of my own. So we do single sign-on. We can partner with clients for single sign-on where they can authenticate through your LMS and come to ours, and we can do that. And there's different pieces we can do depending on the agreements and the licensing that we do around the IP. So we're flexible when it comes to those types of approaches. And any partner you choose should be as well.
Okay, another question coming in. Can you provide examples from the case studies? Walmart, maybe the life-changing activity was mentioned.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that in terms of what, Walmart has shared with us, stories that have floated in from the field that I'm familiar with. So there have been stories that have related to people who have come back to work and talked to their boss about how it reframed their mindset and changed the way they behave and operate at home and also, in other aspects of their private life. There was a story about an individual that was involved in a community service organization and how they thought about the way that organization could work more effectively by applying some of the principles that they learned in the Walmart experience. And then, of course, there were a plethora of stories related to how Walmart employees were applying what they were learning in the business. And what I remember most were examples of people who previously were operating in a more hierarchical way, now feeling more empowered to provide a better customer experience. That's what I can share, kind of based on, again, what's been shared with us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to take a minute. We're getting a little on time. There were in the second question that we asked, there were a lot of challenges that were enumerated, and I don't think we covered them. So in rapid fire, I might hit on a couple of key points of how we dealt with some of those, and then we'll see if there's time for any more questions. So one was around, we talked a lot about alignment and time. If it's part of the strategy and there's time, and obviously there's investment in this, so you have to invest both your time, your blood, sweat, and tears, as well as the financial investment that it takes to reach this many people is not a small matter. But the alignment with the C-suite and the ability to get those funding as a strategic project generally helps with that piece. So that's where that connect makes sense. There was another one on trainer quality. There's a wide variety of trainer quality out there. We run into this a lot. We've been doing a lot of this kind of work with organizations where people say, our trainers are used to working in compliance, but not in leadership. Our trainers are very good at this, but we're not certain that they can take it to that level. And I think that's something that we take very seriously. We provide train-the-trainer there's some minimum requirements to certify, but there's two ways to deal with that. One is to actually simplify the design more if the trainer quality is a concern, meaning that really complex facilitation is not really in their skill set. Then we continue to simplify the design. That's number one. The second is providing them additional support in two ways. One, the train-the-trainer, there's a minimum required, but we have many clients who asked us to support their trainers further. So the train-the-trainer might be a week, but then there might be other days, or we might add a particular time frame. There might be webinars. There's other ways we engage with those trainers. And then I'll just pick up on something that Mike mentioned earlier, which was the community of practice. So if those trainers are getting together and talking to one another, how do they support one another? And then to the extent possible, your partner, and in our case, we do this very regularly and intentionally, we are part of those meetings. So we bring a master facilitator who designed that course into those meetings so that the trainers are saying, here's where I'm struggling, here's where I can't think of examples, here's where the questions that I'm getting, how would you handle them? And we provide that direct support in an ongoing way because we know there are varied levels of expertise in training out there. So that's a really critical part. A couple of other quick ones that I'll just mention. One is in translations. We do this quite a bit. We have a lot of global clients, so we work in partnership with our clients. If there's languages that a partner needs that we don't have, we then partner with them and create some co-development opportunities for us to develop that language, and then we deliver that language in the design. And that consistency across cultures and languages and knowing what works in cultures is also an important part. Language translations is one, cultural localization is another one. And then the final one that I'll just mention was the sustained learning. I think we've touched on that. We've talked about things like leader-led, embedding it in the work. We've talked about things, but there's other techniques, desk drops as reminders, tokens on their computer as reminders of what we learned together, posters in common areas, those types of things. Provide that sustainment and provide people to understand what your learners are trying to figure out is this a fly-by-night, or is this something that we're really focused on? And anything you can do to give them confidence that this is something we're really focused on, that it's important, it's connected, and it drives our business and performance, that will let them know it's real, it's enduring, and it's going to be around. That'll help them engage at different levels. So those are best practices. That was rapid fire, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to hit on a couple of those as we got ready to end.
Very good.
Great, yeah, we got 1 minute left, one question left. Did Walmart leverage a regional approach to delivering the in-person sessions, or was travel to headquarters required?
Oh, this is an easy one. So Walmart did, in fact, leverage a regional approach. They sent people out, facilitators, out into the field, so travel to headquarters was not always required.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jeff and Mike, for sharing how leading companies such as Walmart and Banco Popular deliver leadership at scale. This concludes our program. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email tomorrow, which will include a link to the webinar recording, a white paper, and other resources. We hope that you enjoyed the session and will join us again for a future webinar. As you exit, we hope you take a moment to complete the evaluation we pushed out to you so we can continue to make these events well worth your time. You can also request that a CCL team member follow up with you.
All right. Thank you very much. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.